In exactly 10 minutes, the man sitting in the front seat would kill 3 people. He wouldn't scream, he wouldn't sweat, and he wouldn't hesitate. He would simply execute them with the boredom of a man filing his taxes. In exactly 1 hour, Clara would be standing in a bathroom that cost more than her entire college tuition, scrubbing fresh arterial blood out of a custom-made Vera Wang wedding dress. She would be trembling, staring at her reflection in a gold-framed mirror, trying to understand how her life had dissolved so completely in 60 minutes. But she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, Clara was just a girl standing on a frozen sidewalk in the middle of a torrential downpour, convinced that her night couldn't possibly get any worse. It was 11:47 p.m. The rain wasn't just falling, it was punishing the pavement, turning the neon lights of the city into blurry streaks of blue and red violent art. Clara wasn't looking at the lights, though. She was looking at her phone, watching the battery icon blink from 2% to 1%. She shivered, pulling the soaked lace of her veil tighter around her bare shoulders. She looked insane, and she knew it. Who runs out of their own wedding reception barefoot? Who sprints 4 blocks in a ball gun because they walked in on their new husband shaking hands with a cartel enforcer? Clara did. The adrenaline that had pushed her out the back door of the hotel was fading, replaced by a bone-deep cold and the stinging reality of the blisters forming on her heels. "Come on," she whispered, tapping the screen frantically. "Just find a driver, anyone." The app was spinning, searching, and then a ping, driver found. Black sedan, 2 minutes away. Relief hit her so hard her knees almost buckled. She didn't check the license plate. She didn't check the driver's rating. She just saw headlights cut through the rain, a sleek, shark-like black vehicle gliding to the curb with predatory grace. It looked expensive. It looked safe. It looked like the only lifeline she had left in a world that had just tried to sell her off like cattle. She didn't wait for it to come to a complete stop. She yanked the back door open and threw herself inside, collapsing against the hand-stitched leather interior. The silence inside the car was instant and heavy, cutting off the roar of the rain like a guillotine. It smelled of expensive cologne, old leather, and something metallic, like copper pennies. "Oh my God, thank you," Clara breathed out, her voice shaking as she wiped smeared mascara from under her eyes. She slumped back, closing her eyes for a second, letting the warmth of the heater seep into her frozen skin. "I'm sorry about the dress. I'll pay extra for the cleaning. Just, please drive. I need to go to the airport. Fast." The car didn't move. Clara opened her eyes. The engine was purring, a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the seats, but the transmission was still in park. "Hello, sir. I said the airport. My husband, my ex-husband, he might follow me. We need to go." Silence. Then a sound that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her life. Click, thud. The sound of 4 heavy-duty locks engaging simultaneously. It wasn't the sound of safety. It was the sound of a prison cell slamming shut. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clara sat up straight, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Why are the doors locked? Unlock them. I want to get out." The driver finally moved. He didn't turn around quickly. He moved with a slow, terrifying fluidity. As he shifted, the streetlights outside caught the side of his neck. Dark, intricate ink crawled up from his collar, jagged shapes of dragons and smoke that disappeared into his hairline. He turned his head. He wasn't an Uber driver. He was devastatingly handsome, with high cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that were completely, utterly empty of mercy. He looked at her huddled form in the rearview mirror, then turned his body to face her directly. He looked at the ruined dress. He looked at the terror in her eyes. And then a slow, cold smirk curled the corner of his lip. "Airport." His voice was deep, smooth, and final. "No, you're not going anywhere." Clara reached for the handle, yanking it uselessly. "Let me out. You have the wrong person." The man leaned back, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive weight that pinned her to the seat. "You got in the car, Bambi," he said softly. "This is home now." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to see more videos like this. But to understand how Clara ended up trapped in a hitman's car, you have to rewind exactly 30 minutes. 30 minutes ago, Clara wasn't a hostage. She was a bride standing outside the mahogany doors of the Hotel Sheila's private library, holding a vintage Rolex, a surprise wedding gift for her husband, Richard. She had felt like the luckiest orphan in the world. After her parents died, leaving her with a trust fund she couldn't touch and a loneliness that echoed in her chest, Richard had been the first person to make her feel seen. He was her savior, her family. Or so she thought. She had reached for the door handle when she heard his voice. It wasn't the warm, loving tone he used when he whispered promises of forever. It was cold, transactional. "Don't worry about the prenup," Richard's voice drifted through the crack in the door. "It's void the second the marriage certificate is signed. You'll get your money, Enzo. The trust fund unlocks at midnight. I'm clearing my debts tonight." Clara froze. The Rolex slipped from her fingers, landing on the plush carpet with a muffled thud. "She has no idea," Richard laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "Poor little rich girl. She's so desperate for family she'd sign her death warrant if I told her it was a love letter. She's not a wife, Enzo. She's an ATM." The world tilted on its axis. The man waiting for her at the altar wasn't her savior. He was a predator who had smelled blood in the water. Clara didn't scream. She didn't burst into the room to confront him. The realization that she was truly, utterly alone struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had no parents to call, no siblings to protect her. The invisible girl, that's what the tabloids called her. Richard had just confirmed it. She turned and ran. She ran past the ballroom where 500 guests were waiting for her. She ran past the white roses that cost more than a car. She burst out the service exit and into the freezing Seoul night. The rain hit her like shock therapy. It soaked the heavy silk of her gown instantly, weighing her down, dragging the hem through the oil-slicked puddles. She kicked off her heels, the pavement tearing at her skin, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she stopped, she would have to face the reality that she was alone in the universe. "Just get away," she sobbed, the words torn away by the wind. "Just disappear." That's when she saw it. A sleek black sedan idling at the corner, hazard lights blinking softly in the downpour. It looked like a hole in the night, a place to hide. She didn't think. She just reacted. She yanked the back door open and dove inside, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. "Thank God," she breathed, sinking into the leather seat, closing her eyes against the burning tears. "Just drive, please." For a second there was peace. The rain was muffled. The cold was replaced by climate-controlled warmth. But then she inhaled. The air in the car didn't smell like an Uber. It didn't smell like air freshener or stale cigarettes. It smelled of rich, dark leather. It smelled of expensive, woody cologne. And underneath it all, sharp and metallic, it smelled like gunpowder. Gunpowder. The scent triggered a primal alarm in the back of Clara's brain. Uber drivers didn't smell like spent ammunition. They smelled like pine trees or stale coffee. This car smelled like violence. Clara stopped breathing. Her gaze traveled from the expensive leather upholstery to the back of the driver's neck. The streetlights outside flickered, illuminating what the shadows had hidden. Ink. Intricate, dark tattoos crept up from his collar, serpentine shapes that coiled around his throat like a warning. "You're not my driver," she whispered, the realization hitting her colder than the rain outside. She lunged for the door handle. She yanked it. Nothing. She pulled again, harder, her fingernails scratching uselessly against the polished metal. Locked. Child lock. She was trapped in a soundproof cage of German engineering. "Let me out," her voice cracked, rising an octave. "Open the door." The man in the front seat didn't flinch. He didn't panic at her screaming. He simply reached up with a gloved hand and adjusted the rearview mirror. For the first time, Clara saw his face. He was terrifyingly beautiful. With eyes that were black voids, cold, intelligent, and utterly amused. This wasn't a man who took orders. This was Joon-Ho, the ghost of the Seven Stars Syndicate. He hadn't been idling on this corner to pick up a passenger. He had been waiting for the right moment to put a bullet in her husband's head. Instead, the target's wife had just gift-wrapped herself in the back seat. He watched her reflection, his gaze traveling over the ruined white lace, the tear-streaked mascara, the sheer terror radiating off her. A runaway bride, he mused. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that didn't just fill the car, it seemed to consume the oxygen. How convenient. Please, Clara begged, pressing herself against the far door. I made a mistake, just let me go, I won't say anything. He turned in his seat then, shifting his body so he could look at her directly. He didn't yell. He didn't raise a weapon. He just looked at her with the boredom of a lion watching a mouse try to negotiate. You entered my car, Gil, he said softly. My name is Clara. Not anymore, he countered, his lips curving into a faint, dangerous smile. In my world, you don't make mistakes, you make choices. And once you step in here, you don't step out until I say so. Clara opened her mouth to scream again, but the interior of the car suddenly flooded with blinding white light. She shielded her eyes. Behind them, 3 black SUVs had screeched to a halt, blocking the narrow street. High beams cut through the rain, silhouetting the shapes of men jumping out, men holding submachine guns. Clara gasped, recognizing the lead security guard. Richard, he sent them. Joon-Ho glanced at the side mirror, unbothered, as if the armed hit squad was a minor traffic inconvenience. He shifted the gear stick, the engine roaring to life with a sound like a waking dragon. He looked back at her one last time, his eyes dancing with a sudden, dark thrill. Looks like your ex wants you back, he said, tightening his grip on the wheel. Hang on. Gravity slammed Clara back against the seat so hard the air left her lungs in a whoosh. The black sedan didn't just accelerate, it launched. Joon-Ho spun the wheel with one hand, the car drifting sideways across the wet asphalt before correcting itself with surgical precision. Behind them, the roar of the SUVs was drowned out by the scream of tires. A bullet sparked off the rear bumper, the sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. Oh my God, they're shooting. Clara scrambled for the floorboards, pressing her face into the plush carpet. We're going to die, you have to stop. Stop, Joon-Ho glanced at the rearview mirror, his expression mildly annoyed. And ruin the upholstery? I don't think so. Another volley of gunfire shattered the side mirror. Clara screamed, covering her ears. She looked up, expecting to see Joon-Ho sweating, panicking, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Instead, she saw a blue light blink on the dashboard console. He tapped his earpiece. Talk to me, he said, his voice calm, steady, bored. He swerved the car violently to the left, narrowly missing a delivery truck, while his other hand casually adjusted the volume of the classical music playing softly through the speakers. No, Joon-Ho said into the phone, ignoring the fresh bullet spiderwebbing the rear window. I said the ribeye medium rare, and tell Halmoni I'm bringing a guest. Yes, a guest. Just set the table. Clara stared at him, her mouth agape. You're ordering dinner. They are trying to kill us. They are trying, Joon-Ho corrected, spinning the wheels sharply to the right. They are failing. Ahead, the road narrowed into a tunnel. The lead SUV was gaining on them, its grille filling the rear window. Joon-Ho didn't speed up. He checked his watch. 3, he counted down softly. 2, 1. He didn't hit the brakes. He ripped the emergency brake and jerked the wheel. The heavy sedan spun a perfect 180 degrees, sliding backward on the slick road. He looked directly at the pursuing SUV through the windshield, locked eyes with the terrified driver, and then floored it in reverse, spinning the car back around just as the SUV overcorrected, clipped the tunnel wall, and flipped in a shower of sparks and screeching metal. Silence returned to the cabin, save for the hum of the engine and the soft strains of Vivaldi. Joon-Ho straightened his tie in the mirror, then glanced back at Clara, who was trembling, pale as a ghost, huddled in the corner. You have terrible taste in men, Gil, he said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. They drive like amateurs. Before she could answer, the car slowed, turning into an unmarked alleyway. A massive steel gate groaned open, revealing a concrete ramp descending into the earth. As the car rolled into the darkness and the gates slammed shut behind them with a final, echoing boom, Clara realized the truth. She hadn't escaped. She had just traded a cage made of gold for a fortress made of concrete. The garage elevator didn't have buttons. It scanned Joon-Ho's palm and shot upward with a stomach-dropping lurch. When the doors slid open, Clara wasn't stepping into a home. She was stepping into a fortress of glass and concrete suspended above the city. The penthouse was breathtakingly cold. It was a brutalist masterpiece of sharp angles, gray stone, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Seoul skyline, the very city that had just tried to swallow her whole. In her torn, mud-splattered wedding gown, Clara felt like a chaotic spill on a pristine work of art. The contrast was violent, the softness of her ruined lace against the hard, unyielding masculinity of his world. Joon-Ho walked in first, tossing his keys onto a marble island that looked more like an altar than a kitchen counter. He didn't offer her a tour. He didn't offer her a drink. He simply pointed to the floor. "Shoes," he commanded. "Off." Clara hesitated, shivering as the air conditioning hit her damp skin. "I want to go home. You said I was safe now. Let me call a taxi." Joon-Ho stopped. He turned slowly, the motion predatory in its grace. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, grabbing her upper arm. His grip wasn't painful, but it was unbreakable, a reminder of the strength hidden beneath that tailored suit. He marched her to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "Look down," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "That car chase wasn't a misunderstanding. Those men work for your husband's creditors. They saw your face in my car. They saw you escape with me." He released her, stepping back to lean against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest. "To them, you are no longer just a wife. You are an accomplice. You are a witness to a syndicate operation. If you walk out that door, the police will arrest you, or your husband's business partners will silence you. Permanently." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "So I'm a prisoner." "You're a guest," Joon-Ho corrected, though the word tasted like a lie. He reached into his pocket and slid a heavy black key card across the marble counter. It spun and stopped right in front of her. "This accesses the elevator, the pantry, and your bedroom. It does not open the front door. You will stay here until I resolve the situation with your husband. You will not order takeout. You will not stand near the windows. You will be invisible." "I have a life," Clara snapped, fear momentarily giving way to indignation. "I have a job, I have friends. You can't just keep me here like a pet." Joon-Ho stepped closer, invading her personal space until all she could see was the dark expanse of his suit and the hard line of his jaw. He towered over her, his scent of rain and gunpowder overwhelming her senses. "You don't have a life anymore, Clara," he whispered, his voice dropping to a lethal octave. "You have a debt. I don't owe you anything." "You don't," he agreed, his eyes gleaming cold and hard. "But Richard does. Your husband borrowed $5 million from the Seven Stars to fund his gambling addiction. He couldn't pay." Joon-Ho leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, sending a shiver violently down her spine. "He couldn't pay with money, so he paid with you. You aren't just a guest, Bambi. You are the collateral." "Collateral?" The word echoed in Clara's mind all night, louder than the storm that had finally passed. She hadn't slept. She had sat on the edge of the guest bed, shivering in her ruined wedding dress, waiting for the sun to rise. At 6:00 a.m., the penthouse was silent. This was her chance. Clara crept into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She still wore the gown, the bodice stiff with dried mud, the tulle ripped at the hem, because he hadn't given her anything else. She looked like a ghost haunting a museum. She made it to the kitchen, eyeing the service elevator. If she could just find a vent, a stairwell. Anything. She turned the corner sharply and slammed right into something solid. "Ego." Clara jumped back, heart seizing. It wasn't a guard. It was a tiny, elderly Korean woman, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a floral apron that looked ludicrously out of place in the sterile, gray fortress. She had a wooden spoon in one hand and eyes that were sharper than Joon-Ho's switchblades. The old woman didn't scream. She froze. Her eyes traveled up and down Clara's disheveled figure, widening as they landed on the white dress and the veil hanging limply from Clara's messy hair. The spoon clattered to the floor. The woman gasped, her hands flying to her cheeks. "He did it," she whispered, her face breaking into a beam of pure, terrifying delight. "He finally did it. My grandson stole a bride." "What? No, please, Clara stammered, stepping back. The woman didn't listen. She lunged forward with surprising speed, gripping Clara's arms. "Look at you, so beautiful, a little dirty, yes, but beautiful." She pinched Clara's arm, her expression turning critical. "But too skinny. Did he starve you in the car? Men are useless. Come, sit, I make seaweed soup." "I'm not hungry. I'm a hostage," Clara tried to say, but the woman was already dragging her toward a bar stool with the strength of an ox. "Halmoni." The deep voice cut through the kitchen like a knife. Joon-Ho stood in the doorway, dressed in a fresh black shirt, looking like he hadn't slept either. He stared at the scene, his terrifying grandmother fussing over his frantic hostage. "Step away from her," Joon-Ho said, his tone warning. "She is not what you think." "Quiet, you gangster," the old woman snapped, waving a dismissive hand at the head of the wildest crime syndicate in Seoul. "You bring home a wife on her wedding night, very romantic, very dramatic, just like your father, and you don't even feed her. Shame on you." "She is not my wife," Joon-Ho started, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She is." "She is shaking," Halmoni interrupted, pouring steaming broth into a bowl. "Eat, child, ignore him, he has no manners." Clara looked desperately at Joon-Ho, waiting for him to pull a gun or drag her back to her room. Instead, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation. He crossed the room silently, stopping right behind Clara's chair. The heat radiating off him was immense. He leaned down, his mouth brushing the shell of her ear so only she could hear. "Play along," he whispered, his voice dark and commanding. "If she knows you're a hostage, she will try to sneak you out. And if she tries to sneak you out, my enemies will kill her." Clara stiffened. "Smile, Bambi," he murmured, his hand coming to rest possessively on the back of her neck, his thumb tracing her pulse. "Congratulations, you are now my fiancé." 3 days. That's how long it took for the terror to settle into a strange, suffocating routine. Life in the penthouse was a surreal fever dream. By day, Clara played the role of the shy, doting fiancé for Halmoni, who force-fed her dumplings and told embarrassing stories about Joon-Ho's childhood. By night, she retreated to the guest room, listening to the packing of the predator in the hallway. The wedding dress was the first casualty. On the 4th morning, Joon-Ho kicked open her bedroom door. He didn't say hello. He simply tossed a matte black box onto the bed. "Burn the white dress," he said, leaning against the door frame sipping espresso. "You look like a ghost, and ghosts make me nervous." Clara opened the box. Inside was silk. Black, liquid, expensive silk. It wasn't just a dress, it was a uniform. He wasn't just clothing her, he was branding her. He was erasing the runaway bride and painting her in the colors of the syndicate. "I can't wear this," she muttered, lifting the slip dress. "It's backless." "It's practical," he countered. "Put it on, we have dinner in 10 minutes." He turned to leave, but stopped when he heard her sharp intake of breath. Clara was twisting awkwardly in front of the mirror, her fingers fumbling uselessly with the delicate zipper that ran down the spine. The fabric was stuck. I can't," she admitted, frustration burning her cheeks. Joon-Ho sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. He walked back into the room. The air shifted instantly, charged with static. "Turn around." Clara obeyed, freezing as she felt his presence loom behind her. He was heat and shadow. She expected him to be rough. This was a man who broke bones for a living. But when his knuckles brushed the bare skin of her back, his touch was shocking in its gentleness. He worked the zipper up slowly. His fingers lingered over her shoulder blade, tracing the skin. "Your hands," Clara whispered, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The tattoos on his knuckles were stark against her pale skin. "Why do you cover them in ink?" Joon-Ho paused. His thumb brushed a sensitive spot near her neck, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her toes. "Ink holds better than skin," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers in the glass. "Under every dragon there is a scar, Clara. The 7 stars don't just employ me, they put me back together. For a second, the monster masked slipped. She didn't see a captor. She saw a man who was just as scarred as she was, hiding behind walls of money and violence. The moment shattered with the blare of the television in the living room. "Breaking news," the anchor announced urgently. Clara pulled away, rushing to the screen. Her graduation photo was plastered across the monitor. The headline screamed in bold red letters, "Heiress kidnapped by rival gang." But it was the man giving the press conference that made Clara's blood run cold. Richard stood at a podium, looking devastated, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "My poor Clara," Richard sobbed to the cameras. "Taken from our wedding by violent criminals, if you are watching, I will find you. I will pay any price." Clara stumbled back. "He's lying. He knows he sold me." Joon-Ho stepped up beside her, his face hardening into stone. "He's not lying to the police," Joon-Ho said, his voice lethal. "He's crafting a narrative. He's painting himself as the hero so he can hunt us down with the law on his side." "Get dressed." Joon-Ho turned off the television, the image of Richard's fake tears fading into black. He didn't look worried. He looked like a general who had just decided it was time to invade. "We are going out," he announced, checking the magazine of his pistol before sliding it into his holster. "The syndicate holds the midnight auction tonight. If I don't show my face, they will think I'm weak. And if I leave you here, Richard's men will storm the building within the hour. You're coming with me." 20 minutes later, Clara stood before the mirror, unrecognizable. The black slip dress was gone. In its place was a gown of deep, violent crimson, the color of blood and wine. It was backless, slit to the thigh, and clung to her curves like a second skin. It was a dress designed to start wars. Joon-Ho stepped behind her, holding a diamond choker that glittered under the harsh lights. He brushed her hair aside, his fingers lingering on her nape. "Beautiful," Clara whispered despite herself. "Functional," Joon-Ho corrected. He fastened the clasp with a cold click. "It's a GPS tracker, Clara. It has a range of 50 meters. If you try to run, my security team will find you before you make it to the exit. If you try to take it off, it alerts me instantly. Do you understand?" "I understand," she breathed, touching the cold stones. "I'm not a date, I'm a dog on a leash." "Tonight," he said, offering her his arm, "you are the queen of Seoul. Don't disappoint me." The midnight auction was a sea of sharks in tuxedos. Held in the hollowed-out shell of an abandoned opera house, the air smelled of expensive perfume and moral decay. As they descended the grand staircase, the room went silent. All eyes turned to Joon-Ho, the ghost of the 7 stars, and the stunning woman on his arm. Joon-Ho's hand settled on the small of her back. It was possessive, heavy, and hot against her bare skin. "Smile," he murmured through his teeth, waving to a man who looked like a warlord. "Look at me like you adore me, like I'm the only man in the room." Clara forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I hate you." "That's the spirit," he whispered, pulling her closer until her hip bumped his. "Keep hate in your eyes. It looks like passion to them." They moved through the crowd, a perfect, lethal couple. But then the crowd parted. Clara froze, her blood turned to ice. Standing by the champagne tower, holding a glass of scotch, was Richard. He looked impeccable, grieving, and dangerous. He was laughing at a joke, but his eyes were scanning the room. They stopped on Clara. The glass in Richard's hand didn't break, but his smile did. It vanished, replaced by a look of twisted ownership. He set the glass down and began to walk toward them. Flanking him were 2 men who were definitely not waiters. "Clara," Richard called out, his voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. "There you are, darling." Clara took a step back, instinct screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. A wall of muscle moved in front of her. Joon-Ho stepped between them, blocking Richard's path. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just stood there, adjusting his cuffs, radiating a violence so pure it made the air heavy. "Careful, Richard," Joon-Ho said, his voice low enough to be a growl. "You're getting too close to my fiancé." "Fiancé." Richard laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound that grated against the sudden silence of the opera house. He took a step forward, his face twisting from grief to ugly entitlement. "Don't be ridiculous. That is my wife. She belongs to me." Richard reached out, his hand aiming for Clara's arm. "Come here, Clara. The game is over." Clara flinched, but Joon-Ho didn't move an inch. He simply caught Richard's wrist in midair. The grip looked casual, but Richard's face went white as the pressure increased. "You seem confused," Joon-Ho said, his voice carrying through the hall, calm and terrifying. He smiled that same chilling, possessive smile he had worn in the car. "She was your wife when she walked down the aisle, Richard. She became mine when she got in my car." Richard snapped his fingers. The two bodyguards flanking him lunged. It wasn't a fair fight, it was an execution. Joon-Ho didn't let go of Clara's waist. He treated her as the axis of his world, pivoting around her with fluid, brutal efficiency. As the first guard reached for her, Joon-Ho drove an elbow into the man's throat, collapsing his windpipe with a sickening crunch. The second guard swung a fist. Joon-Ho ducked, swept the man's legs, and slammed his head into the nearby champagne tower. Glass shattered. Thousands of dollars of crystal rained down like diamonds. Clara screamed, burying her face in Joon-Ho's chest. He stood amidst the wreckage, barely breathing hard, his suit unruffled. "Anyone else?" Joon-Ho asked the room. Richard, realizing he couldn't win with muscle, played his final card. He turned to the crowd of warlords and syndicate bosses, his eyes wide with desperation. "He's protecting a traitor," Richard screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. "She's not a hostage, she's a thief. She stole the master access codes to the trust. She's the one who froze your accounts." It was a lie, a desperate, poisonous lie, but in a room full of paranoid criminals, it was a spark in a powder keg. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The awe turned to hostility. Hands reached inside jackets. The click of safety catches disengaging echoed around the room like crickets. "Richard, stop," Clara cried out. "I didn't." "Kill them," Richard shrieked. A gun flashed from the balcony. Joon-Ho didn't try to return fire. He didn't dive for cover. He did the only thing that mattered. He spun Clara around, wrapping his massive frame around hers, shielding her completely with his body. Bang! The sound was deafening. Clara felt the impact shudder through Joon-Ho's chest against her back. He grunted, a low, wet sound of pain, but he didn't fall. He tightened his grip. "Don't look," he rasped, his voice strained. "Just run." The drive back to the penthouse was a blur of wet asphalt and iron. Joon-Ho hadn't spoken since the car doors slammed shut. He had driven with one hand, his face gray, his other hand pressed against his shoulder, dark blood seeping between his fingers to stain the pristine leather steering wheel. When they stumbled into the foyer, he collapsed against the marble island in the kitchen, sliding down to the floor. "I'm calling a doctor," Clara panic-stricken, fumbling for her phone. "You're losing too much blood." "No," Joon-Ho grabbed her wrist, his grip weak but desperate. "No doctors. Richard has bought half the medical board in this city. If I go to a hospital, I'm a dead man. You do it." "Me," Clara stared at the first aid kit he kicked toward her. "I'm not a surgeon, Joon-Ho. I'm an art history major." "It's just skin and muscle, Clara, so it shut." 10 minutes later, the kitchen looked like a battlefield triage. Joon-Ho sat shirtless on the floor, sweat beading on his forehead, the dragons on his skin glistening in the harsh light. The bullet had passed through, clean but messy. Clara's hands were shaking so hard she could barely thread the needle. She was still wearing the red dress, now stained darker with his blood. "I can't," she sobbed, holding the needle over his torn flesh. "I'm going to hurt you." Joon-Ho reached up, his bloody hand cupping her cheek, leaving a smear of red on her pale skin. He forced her to look at him. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were fever-bright and terrifyingly open. "You won't hurt me, Bambi," he rasped. "You're the only thing in this world that hasn't." Clara took a breath, steadied her hand, and pierced the skin. He didn't scream, he just watched her face. As she worked, stitching the man who had kidnapped her back together, the silence between them shifted. It wasn't the silence of captor and prisoner. It was the silence of two people drowning in the same ocean. "Why?" Clara whispered, tying off the final stitch. "You could have let me go that first night. You could have dumped me on the street. Why did you keep me?" Joon-Ho leaned his head back against the cabinets, his eyes half closing. The pain meds were kicking in, loosening his tongue. "Because everyone runs away from me, Clara. Everyone. My enemies, my family, the world. They see a monster and they run." He opened his eyes, pinning her with a gaze that shattered her heart. "But that night, in the rain, you didn't run away. You opened my door. You ran to me. For 5 seconds, I wasn't the monster. I was just the guy who could save you." Clara froze. The realization hit her harder than the bullet had hit him. She looked at the blood on her hands, then at the man bleeding out on his kitchen floor to protect her. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was terrified of a world without him. She leaned in, her lips parting to speak, to tell him. The front door didn't open. It shook on its hinges. Halmoni burst into the kitchen, no longer the sweet grandmother. She was holding a shotgun that looked bigger than she was. "Get up," she screamed, racking the slide. "Richard is downstairs. He brought the whole cartel. We are surrounded." "Go." Joon-Ho shoved Clara toward the mahogany bookshelf. He pressed a hidden sensor, and the wall groaned open, revealing a narrow, concrete tunnel plunging into darkness. "It leads to the subway maintenance lines," he shouted over the sound of battering rams hitting the front steel doors. He pressed a fresh magazine into her hand, his blood slick on the metal. "Take Halmoni. Run. You're free, Clara. This is what you wanted." Clara stared into the dark tunnel. It smelled of damp earth and safety. It smelled like her old life, lonely, invisible, safe. She looked back at Joon-Ho. He was leaning against the desk, pale and bleeding, holding a submachine gun with a steady hand. He was preparing to die so she could return to a world that didn't care if she existed. "No," she whispered. Joon-Ho's eyes widened. "Clara, don't be stupid. Go." "I'm done running." Clara turned away from the tunnel. She walked past him, ignoring his shout, and marched straight to the main double doors of the penthouse. She threw the locks. She yanked the doors wide open. Richard stood there, flanked by 3 heavily armed men. He blinked, stunned to see his wife standing in a blood-soaked red dress, unarmed, looking him dead in the eye. "Clara," Richard smirked, lowering his weapon slightly. "Finally coming to your senses." "I am," Clara said, her voice steady as steel. "I realized something, Richard." "What's that?" "I forgot to open the door for the lion." She dropped to the floor. Behind her, Joon-Ho didn't hesitate. The roar of his weapon filled the foyer. It was a massacre. Richard's men fell before they could raise their rifles. Richard scrambled back, tripping over his own feet, but he wasn't fast enough. Joon-Ho was on him in a heartbeat, ignoring his own wounds. He kicked the gun out of Richard's hand and pinned him to the floor with a boot to the throat. The silence that followed was heavy with smoke and sulfur. Clara stood up. She walked over to where her husband lay gasping for air. She looked down at him, not with fear, but with absolute indifference. "I'm filing for divorce, Richard," she said softly. You can't," Richard choked out. "I'll destroy you, I'll take everything." Clara leaned down, picking up the gun Joon-Ho had given her. She checked the safety, just like he had taught her. "You can't take anything," she said. "The alimony is your life." 6 months later. The rain in Seoul was just as heavy as the night she had run away, but the woman watching it from the passenger seat didn't shiver. Clara adjusted the cuffs of her tailored charcoal suit. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress. She was wearing a diamond choker and a holster beneath her blazer. The black sedan glided through the neon-lit streets, the engine purring with a low, dangerous rumble. The driver turned the corner with one hand, his movements smooth and practiced. He glanced at the rearview mirror, checking for tails out of habit, then looked at her. The tattoos on his neck were visible above his collar, darker and more intricate than before. He smiled, that same terrifying, possessive smile, but this time there was warmth in it. "We have a meeting with the triads in 20 minutes. Joon-Ho said, his voice deep and calm. "Where to first, Mrs. Park?" Clara looked at him. She reached across the center console, resting her hand over his tattooed knuckles on the gear shift. She didn't look at the road. She didn't look at the rain. She looked at the monster who had saved her. "Home," she smiled. "Drive."